The music box sat on the dusty shelf, its melody long forgotten. But Maggie Fletcher would never forget the night it played. The night she danced with the devil in a black Stetson. The night one waltz cost her everything. They say in the territories of 1882, a cowboy's word was law. But nobody warned her about the cruel ones. The ones who collected debts in blood and bound souls with silver. By the time she understood the rules of his twisted game, she was already his. This is the story of how a single dance destroyed her life, and how she fought like hell to get it back. 3 weeks earlier, the Colorado frontier stretched wild and untamed under an August sun. Maggie Fletcher stood on the platform of Pine Ridge Station, her worn traveling bag clutched in both hands, watching the train disappear into the distance. At 23, she had left everything behind. Philadelphia's suffocating parlors, her stepfather's gambling debts, the marriage arrangement to a banker twice her age. The West promised freedom, a chance to teach in a one-room schoolhouse, a chance to finally breathe. The town sprawled before her like something from a dime novel. Wooden buildings lined a dusty main street. Horses tied to hitching posts flicked their tails at flies. Men in wide-brimmed hats watched her with open curiosity. A woman alone, clearly educated, clearly out of place. Maggie straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She had not come this far to show fear. A weathered woman in a simple calico dress approached, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Her face was kind but lined with hard years. "Miss Fletcher," she called out. "I'm Mrs. Pritchard. I run the boarding house. The school board sent me to fetch you." Maggie smiled with relief. "Thank you so much. I wasn't sure anyone would come." Mrs. Pritchard hefted Maggie's bag with surprising strength. "Of course we came. This town's been waiting months for a proper teacher. The children need learning, and we need someone with book sense." She started walking, and Maggie fell in a step beside her. "Though I should warn you right now, Pine Ridge ain't Philadelphia. We've got rough edges here. Rough people, too." They walked through town, Mrs. Pritchard pointing out the important places. The general store run by a Chinese immigrant named Henry Chun. The whitewashed church where Reverend Mills preached fire and brimstone every Sunday. The doctor's office, the blacksmith's forge, the modest sheriff's station. And then, at the far end of town, set apart like a dark crown on a hill, stood the largest building Maggie had seen since leaving the city. It was 3 stories tall, painted black with gold trim that caught the late afternoon sun. A large sign hung above the entrance, ornate letters spelling out Silver Spur. Even from a distance, Maggie could see it was nothing like the simple frontier buildings around it. This place had money. Lots of it. "That's the Silver Spur," Mrs. Pritchard said, and her voice dropped low, like she was speaking of something dangerous. "It's a gaming hall. Cards, dice, roulette wheels. Owned by Cole Maverick." The name landed heavy in the dusty air. Maggie glanced at Mrs. Pritchard and saw something in the older woman's face. Not just caution, but genuine fear. "Maverick?" Maggie repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Richest man in 3 counties," Mrs. Pritchard said quietly. "Maybe the most dangerous, too. He owns half the businesses in Pine Ridge. The freight company, the mine outside town, the cattle ranch to the east. Even owns part of the bank." She looked at Maggie with serious eyes. "Best advice I can give you, Miss Fletcher, is to stay far away from that man and that building. Nothing good comes from the Silver Spur." A chill ran down Maggie's spine despite the summer heat. She wanted to ask more questions, but Mrs. Pritchard was already moving on, leading her toward a 2-story house with a painted sign that read, "Pritchard's Boarding House, clean rooms, fair prices." Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and lye soap. Mrs. Pritchard showed Maggie to a small room on the 2nd floor. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a wooden chair, and a window that looked out over the main street. Maggie set down her bag and moved to the window. From here, she could see the entire town laid out below. And there, looming at the edge of everything, was the Silver Spur. "Supper's at 6. Mrs. Pritchard said from the doorway. "You'll meet the other boarders then. They're good folk, mostly. And tomorrow, I'll take you to the schoolhouse so you can get things ready. School starts Monday." After Mrs. Pritchard left, Maggie unpacked her few belongings. 2 plain dresses, a nicer blue one for Sundays, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small Bible her mother had given her before she died, and her teaching books. Everything she owned in the world fit in one carpet bag. It felt both terrifying and freeing. That evening, she met her fellow boarders at supper. There was Mr. Wilson, an elderly prospector with tales of the gold rush. Miss Abernathy, a stern seamstress who kept to herself, and young Timothy, an apprentice at the blacksmith who couldn't have been more than 16. They were polite but curious, asking Maggie about Philadelphia and why she had come west. She gave them the simple answer: to teach. She did not mention her stepfather's debts or the arranged marriage. Some truths were better left in the past. After supper, Maggie returned to her room, exhausted from the long journey. She changed in her nightgown and moved to close the curtains. That's when she heard it. Music, faint but clear, drifting on the evening air. She looked out and saw the silver spur, all its windows glowing with warm light. Through the large front windows, she could see people inside, men in dark suits, women in colorful dresses. They were dancing, spinning across a polished floor to the music of a small band. It looked beautiful, elegant, almost magical in the growing darkness. Maggie watched, mesmerized, as couple after couple waltzed past the windows. She had loved to dance once, back in Philadelphia. Her mother had taught her when she was just a girl. That felt like a lifetime ago now. She watched for a long moment, then shook her head and pulled the curtains closed. Mrs. Pritchard had warned her to stay away from the silver spur and its owner. That was advice Maggie intended to follow. She had come to Pine Ridge for a fresh start, not trouble. But as she climbed into bed and closed her eyes, she didn't know that within 48 hours, she would be inside that building. She would hear that music up close, and she would dance a waltz that would change everything. A waltz with a man whose cold blue eyes could freeze your blood. A waltz that would bind her to Cole Maverick in ways she could never have imagined. The devil was waiting, and Maggie Fletcher was walking straight toward him. Morning came bright and early. Maggie woke to the sound of wagons rumbling down the street and roosters crowing in the distance. She dressed quickly in her plain brown work dress and went downstairs for breakfast. Mrs. Pritchard had prepared coffee, biscuits, and bacon. The other boarders were already eating, talking quietly about their plans for the day. After breakfast, Mrs. Pritchard walked Maggie to the schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was a simple building, just one room with wooden benches, a pot-bellied stove, and a chalkboard at the front. Dust covered everything. It would need a good cleaning before Monday, but Maggie felt a surge of excitement. This was hers, her classroom, her fresh start. She spent the morning sweeping and scrubbing, organizing the few books the school owned, preparing lessons in her head. Around noon, she decided to walk into town for supplies. She needed chalk, paper, and a few other items for teaching. Mrs. Pritchard had mentioned the general store carried school supplies. The store was busy when she arrived. Mr. Chun, the owner, was a patient man with kind eyes and careful hands. He helped Maggie find what she needed, recommending the best chalk and showing her slates the children could use for practice. As he wrapped her purchases, he spoke quietly. "Mrs. Pritchard told me you're the new teacher," he said. "That's good. This town needs good people. Needs hope." He paused, glancing toward the door, then leaned closer. "But Miss Fletcher, you should know something. Not everyone in Pine Ridge wants things to get better. Some men profit from keeping folks scared and ignorant." Before Maggie could ask what he meant, the door opened. Sunlight flooded in, and with it came a presence that seemed to suck the air from the room. Maggie turned and saw him for the first time. Cole Maverick stood in the doorway like he owned not just the threshold, but the entire world beyond it. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders filling out an expensive black suit that had no place in a frontier town. His hair was dark, slicked back, and his eyes were the coldest blue Maggie had ever seen. They reminded her of winter ice over deep water, beautiful and deadly. He removed his hat and smiled, but it never reached those eyes. "Mr. Chun," he said, his voice smooth as whiskey. "Good to see business is thriving." Mr. Chin's whole body had gone stiff. "Mr. Maverick, can I help you with something?" Maverick's gaze had already shifted to Maggie. He studied her with the intensity of a man appraising merchandise. It made her skin crawl, but she refused to look away. She had dealt with powerful men before, men who thought women were property. She would not cower. "You must be Miss Fletcher," Maverick said, and his smile widened slightly. "Our new schoolteacher. Welcome to Pine Ridge." He stepped closer, and Maggie caught the scent of expensive cologne and cigar smoke. "I'm Cole Maverick. I own the Silver Spur and several other establishments in town." He extended his hand. Maggie hesitated, then shook it briefly. His grip was firm, possessive, lasting a moment too long. "Thank you, Mr. Maverick," she said coolly. "I'm sure we'll see each other around town." "Oh, I'm certain of it," he said, still holding her hand. "In fact, I insist you attend the Harvest Festival tomorrow night at the Silver Spur. The whole town will be there. It's tradition." Maggie pulled her hand free. "I'll consider it." Something flickered in Maverick's eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or irritation at not getting immediate agreement. "I do hope you'll come, Miss Fletcher. In Pine Ridge, my invitations are rarely declined." He tipped his hat. "Good day." He left as suddenly as he had appeared, and the tension in the room dissolved like smoke. Mr. Chun let out a breath he had been holding. "Miss Fletcher," he said urgently, "be careful around that man." "Very careful." Maggie gathered her packages. "What exactly should I be careful of?" Mr. Chin glanced toward the door again. "Everything. Cole Maverick doesn't do anything without a reason. If he's noticed you, it's because he wants something. And what Cole Maverick wants, he takes." That evening, back at the boarding house, Maggie learned more about the Harvest Festival. It wasn't optional. Mrs. Pritchard explained over supper. Every year, Maverick hosted a grand party at the Silver Spur. He provided food, music, and entertainment. On the surface, it seemed generous, but everyone knew the real purpose. It was Maverick's way of reminding the town who held the power. Attendance was expected. Those who stayed home found their businesses suffering mysterious setbacks. Their loans called in early. Their shipments delayed. "It's how he keeps control," Miss Abernathy said quietly, picking at her food. "By making himself seem generous while holding a knife to everyone's back." Maggie felt anger rising in her chest. "And no one stands up to him." Mr. Wilson, the old prospector, laughed bitterly. "Stand up to him with what? He owns the bank, owns half the law. Sheriff Cassidy is a good man, but even he can't touch Maverick. The man's too rich, too connected." That night, Maggie lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Mr. Chin's warning, about Mrs. Pritchard's fear, about the way Maverick had looked at her, like a wolf spotting a lamb. She had come west to escape controlling men, and here she was, facing another one. But this one was different. This one had an entire town under his thumb. She almost decided not to go to the festival. But then she thought about the children she would teach, about being part of this community. If she refused Maverick's invitation on her second day in town, what message would that send? That she was afraid? That she could be bullied? No, she would go. She would be polite but distant. She would show Cole Maverick that Maggie Fletcher could not be intimidated. It was just one evening. What could possibly go wrong? The next night, she wore her blue dress, the nicest one she owned. It was simple, modest, nothing fancy. She walked with Mrs. Pritchard and the other boarders to the Silver Spur. The building looked even more impressive up close, all that black paint and gold trim gleaming in the lamplight. Music poured from the open doors, along with laughter and the sounds of celebration. Inside, Maggie was struck by the sheer luxury of it all. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting dancing light across polished wooden floors. Gaming tables lined one side of the room, where men played cards and roulette. On the other side, couples danced to a four-piece band. Long tables held food and drink, more than Maggie had seen in months. It was like stepping into a different world. Mrs. Pritchard stayed close to Maggie, introducing her to various townspeople. The blacksmith and his wife, the banker, the newspaper editor. Everyone was polite, welcoming even, but Maggie noticed how they all kept glancing toward the back of the room, where Cole Maverick held court at a private table, surrounded by well-dressed men and painted women. Maggie tried to enjoy herself. She sampled the food, sipped punch, made small talk with the locals. She was just starting to relax when the music stopped. The room fell silent, and Cole Maverick stood, his eyes locked on her. He crossed the room with deliberate steps, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. When he reached Maggie, he smiled that cold smile and extended his hand. "Miss Fletcher, may I have this dance?" Every eye in the room was on her. The band waited, instruments ready. Maggie's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of expectation, the fear radiating from the people around her. This was a test. Everyone knew it. "Thank you, Mr. Maverick," she said clearly, "but I prefer not to dance this evening." The silence deepened. Maverick's smile never wavered, but his eyes turned glacial. "Come now, Miss Fletcher. Surely one dance won't hurt. It's traditional for me to dance with all the newcomers to our town." "Then I'm afraid I must break with tradition," Maggie said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm quite tired from preparing the schoolhouse. Perhaps another time." She turned to walk away, but Maverick's voice stopped her. It was louder now, projecting across the entire room. "A wager, then?" Maggie froze. She turned back slowly. Maverick stood there, arms crossed, looking supremely confident. The entire crowd had gone deathly silent. "A wager," Maggie repeated. "For the entertainment of our guests," Maverick said, gesturing to the crowd. "A friendly game, Miss Fletcher. One waltz. Just one. 3 minutes." He paused, letting the tension build. "If you can dance with me for 3 full minutes without stepping on my feet even once, I will personally donate $500 to your schoolhouse." Gasps rippled through the crowd. $500 was a fortune, enough to buy books, slates, supplies for years. Maggie's mind raced. What was the catch? "And if I do step on your feet?" she asked carefully. Maverick's smile grew wider, showing teeth. "Then, Miss Fletcher, you become my wife." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Some people laughed nervously, thinking it must be a joke, but Maggie saw the faces of those who knew better. Mrs. Pritchard had gone pale. Mr. Chun shook his head slowly. This was no joke. "That's absurd," Maggie said, forcing a laugh. "You can't be serious, Mr. Maverick. That's not legally binding." Maverick reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "Territorial law, Section 47, he said smoothly. "Any verbal contract witnessed by 10 or more citizens is legally binding. I count at least 50 witnesses in this room." He looked around. "Isn't that right, Sheriff?" Sheriff Tom Cassidy stepped forward reluctantly from the crowd. He was a decent man. Maggie could see it in his weathered face, but he looked beaten down. "He's right, Miss Fletcher. It's an old mining law, but it's still valid. If you agree to the wager in front of all these people, it becomes a binding contract." Maggie's mind raced. This was insane, but she looked at Maverick's confident smirk and felt her temper flare. $500 would transform that schoolhouse. The children deserved that chance. And she was an excellent dancer. Her mother had trained her in Philadelphia's best ballrooms. 3 minutes without a single misstep? She could do that in her sleep. "Fine," she heard herself say. "I accept your wager, Mr. Maverick." The crowd buzzed with excitement and fear. Maverick's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Excellent. Gentlemen, clear the floor." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" Maggie ignored his arm and walked to the center of the cleared dance floor. Her heart pounded, but she lifted her chin high. She would beat him at his own game, take his money, and teach him that Maggie Fletcher was no one's fool. The band struck up a waltz, slow and haunting. Maverick took position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. His grip was firm, almost painful. "Nervous, Miss Fletcher?" he whispered. "Not at all," she lied. The music swelled, and they began to dance. At first, Maggie felt confident. She knew every step, every turn. Maverick was a skilled dancer, she had to admit, but so was she. They moved across the floor in perfect rhythm. The crowd watched in complete silence, barely breathing. 1 minute passed, then 2. Maggie's confidence grew. She could do this. She could win. Then Maverick leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Your stepfather, Gerald Fletcher. He owes me $3,000. Maggie stumbled slightly, but caught herself. Her blood ran cold. "What?" "Gambling debts," Maverick continued, spinning her smoothly. "Acquired in Philadelphia over the past 2 years. He sold his debt to me 6 months ago, along with his rights to arrange a marriage." His smile was cruel. "Did you think running west would make his problems disappear?" Maggie's concentration shattered. Her stepfather had debts to this man. That was impossible. How could Maverick even know about her stepfather? "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I?" Maverick spun her again, faster now. "I have the documents. All legal. All signed. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. When you refuse to marry me after losing this wager, I'll simply collect the debt another way. I believe your stepfather has another daughter. Your half-sister Emily? Sweet girl. Only 15 years old." Horror flooded through Maggie. Emily, her innocent little sister back in Philadelphia. The thought of her in Maverick's clutches made her sick. She missed a step, just barely but enough. Her foot came down on his polished boot. The music stopped instantly. The room went dead silent. Maggie stood frozen, staring at Maverick in shock. It couldn't be. She had been so close. Maverick's smile was victorious and terrible. "I believe that counts as a misstep, Miss Fletcher." He raised his voice so the entire room could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have all witnessed this wager. Miss Margaret Fletcher has agreed to become my wife." "No," Maggie breathed. "You cheated. You distracted me on purpose." "A wager is a wager," Maverick said coldly. "And I never cheat. I simply play to win." He released her and stepped back. "You have 1 week to prepare, my dear. Next Saturday, you will become Mrs. Cole Maverick in a proper church ceremony." Maggie looked around desperately at the crowd. "Someone help me. This isn't right." He manipulated the entire situation. But people looked away, some with pity, some with relief that it wasn't them. No one spoke up. No one dared challenge Cole Maverick. Sheriff Cassidy stepped forward, his face grim. "Miss Fletcher, I'm sorry. 53 people witnessed the wager and the outcome. Under territorial law, you're bound to honor the contract." Maverick leaned close one final time. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer I collect your stepfather's debt from your sister instead. The choice is yours. Become my wife or destroy your family. You have until Saturday to decide." He walked away, leaving Maggie standing alone in the center of the dance floor, her entire world crashing down around her. Maggie didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale morning blue. Her mind spun with desperate plans. She could run. She could hide. She could fight. But every plan crashed against the same cold reality. Maverick held all the cards. If she ran, Emily would pay the price. If she fought, her family would be destroyed. At breakfast, Mrs. Pritchard placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, but said nothing. What could she say? The entire town knew what had happened. By morning, it would be gossip in every household. The new schoolteacher trapped by Cole Maverick's cruel game. After breakfast, Maggie walked to the sheriff's office. She had to try. Sheriff Cassidy looked up from his desk, and she saw genuine sympathy in his tired eyes. "Miss Fletcher, I figured you'd come. There has to be a way out of this," Maggie said urgently. "Some legal loophole. Something." Cassidy sighed heavily and gestured for her to sit. "I've been up all night reading through every law book I own. The contract is legal. witnessed by over 50 people. You agreed to the terms in front of everyone. He rubbed his face. The only way out is to pay the $3,000 your stepfather owes, or prove Maverick coerced you. But with 53 witnesses saying you agreed freely, he manipulated me. He threatened my sister. Did anyone else hear that threat? Maggie's heart sank. No, we were dancing. He whispered it. It's your word against his. And in this town, Maverick's word carries weight. Cassidy leaned forward. Miss Fletcher, I wish I could help you, but I'm just one man. Maverick owns the bank, the mine, half the freight business. He has connections all the way to Denver. Even if I arrested him, which I can't because he's broken no law, he'd be out in an hour. Maggie left the sheriff's office feeling hollower than before. She walked aimlessly through town, trying to think. $3,000. She didn't have $3 to her name. Even if she worked as a teacher for 10 years, she couldn't save that much. That afternoon, Mrs. Pritchard found her sitting in the empty schoolhouse. Child, the older woman said softly, I need to tell you something about Cole Maverick's wives. Maggie looked up. Wives? Plural? Mrs. Pritchard sat on one of the student benches. He's been married twice before. The first was Caroline, a rancher's daughter. Beautiful girl, full of life. They married 5 years ago. 6 months later, she died. Fell from her horse, they said. Broke her neck. Mrs. Pritchard's voice dropped. But Doc Wilson saw the body. Said she had old bruises. Marks on her arms like someone had grabbed her hard. It didn't look like any riding accident he'd ever seen. Maggie's blood turned to ice. And the second wife, Anna, a widow from Denver. She married him 3 years ago. She lasted 8 months before she disappeared one night. Just vanished. Maverick claimed she ran away, abandoned the marriage. They never found her body, but Mrs. Pritchard's eyes filled with tears. I don't think she ran away, Miss Fletcher. I think she tried to leave, and Maverick made sure she never could. Maggie felt sick. She was going to marry a monster, a murderer, and there was nothing she could do about it. That evening, she tried to run anyway. She waited until midnight, packed her small bag, and crept down to the train station. But when she arrived, 2 of Maverick's men were waiting in the shadows. They didn't hurt her. They didn't need to. One of them just smiled and said, Boss figured you might try this. He says to remind you about your sister. Pretty little thing, Emily. Be ashamed if something happened to her. They walked her back to the boarding house. Not roughly, but firmly, making sure she understood. She was trapped. There was no escape. The next morning, a package arrived. Inside was a wedding dress, pure white silk with delicate lace. It must have cost more than Maggie earned in a year. With it came a note in elegant handwriting. Wear this on Saturday. Tell everyone how happy you are. Play your role well, and your sister stays safe. Disappoint me, and I'll make sure Emily learns what disappointment truly costs. Cole. Maggie sat on her bed, holding the dress, and finally let herself cry. She had come west for freedom and found a prison instead. In 5 days, she would marry Cole Maverick. And if his previous wives were any indication, she might not survive the year. But as she wiped her tears, a thought took root. Maverick had documents about her stepfather's debt. Documents he kept somewhere, probably in his office at the Silver Spur. If those documents were forged, if she could prove he fabricated the debt, the entire contract would be invalid. She would be free, and Emily would be safe. It was dangerous, maybe impossible, but it was the only chance she had. And Maggie Fletcher had not come this far to die without a fight. Saturday arrived like an executioner's blade. The morning sky was gray and heavy, threatening rain. Maggie stood in her small room, staring at herself in a mirror. The white silk dress fit perfectly, like a beautiful cage. Her dark hair was pinned up, and someone had sent flowers for her to carry. White roses. Mrs. Pritchard said they meant peace. All Maggie saw were funeral flowers. The ceremony was held at the church, but it felt nothing like a celebration. The whole town came because they had to, not because they wanted to, Reverend Mills performed the service with a shaking voice. Sheriff Cassidy stood in the back, jaw clenched tight. Mr. Chin wouldn't even look at her. The guilt on their faces was almost worse than the fear. Cole Maverick stood at the altar in an expensive black suit, looking like the devil dressed for church. When Maggie walked down the aisle, he smiled that cold smile. She felt like she was walking to her own funeral. "Do you, Margaret Fletcher, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Maggie's throat was dry. She thought of Emily, safe in Philadelphia. She thought of Maverick's previous wives who never got to grow old. She thought of the documents hidden somewhere in his office. "I do," she whispered. "And do you, Cole Maverick, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he said firmly, triumphantly. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." Reverend Mills looked sick. "You may kiss the bride." Maverick's kiss was cold and claiming, a brand of ownership. When he pulled back, he whispered in her ear, "You're mine now, Mrs. Maverick." Don't forget it. The reception was held at the Silver Spur, just like everything else in Maverick's life. There was food, music, champagne. People danced and pretended to celebrate while Maggie sat at the head table feeling numb. She barely ate. She couldn't. Every bite tasted like ash. Maverick drank steadily throughout the evening, his face growing flushed. He kept one hand on her arm at all times, possessive and controlling. When men came to congratulate him, he spoke of her like property. "My wife, my bride, mine." As midnight approached, most guests had left. Only Maverick's closest associates remained, smoking cigars and playing cards. Maverick stood, swaying slightly. "Gentlemen, I'll leave you to your games. I have a wedding night to attend to." The men laughed, and Maggie felt sick. But then one of Maverick's business partners called him over to settle a dispute about a freight contract. Maverick scowled, but went, leaving Maggie alone at the table. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance. She stood carefully and slipped toward the back of the building. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Maverick's office was down a hallway past the main room. She'd seen him go there earlier. The door was closed, but not locked. Maggie glanced back. Maverick was still arguing with his partners, his back to her. She slipped into the office and closed the door silently behind her. The room was all dark wood and leather, expensive and cold like the man who owned it. A large desk dominated the space, covered with papers and ledgers. Maggie moved quickly, searching through drawers. Nothing, just business contracts and receipts. Then she found it, a locked drawer at the bottom. She pulled a hairpin from her hair and worked at the lock, her hands shaking. After what felt like hours, but was probably seconds, it clicked open. Inside were documents. And there, near the bottom, she found papers with her stepfather's name. She pulled them out, her hands trembling. As she read by lamplight, her blood turned to ice, then to fire. The signatures were forged. She could see it clearly. Her stepfather's signature looked nothing like his real handwriting. Maverick had fabricated the entire debt. There was no $3,000. There never had been. He had manufactured the whole story to trap her, to force her into marriage. Fury flooded through her. That monster had lied about everything. Emily was never in danger. The debt was fake. This whole nightmare was built on fraud. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, unsteady. Maverick. The door burst open. He stood there, eyes cold and dangerous despite the alcohol. "Looking for something, wife." Maggie clutched the documents. "These are forged. You lied about my stepfather's debt. You lied about everything." Maverick stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "And who's going to believe you? You're my wife now. Your property, your words, your very life belongs to me." He moved toward her, and Maggie saw murder in his eyes. Maggie backed against the desk, the forged documents clutched in her hands. Maverick advanced slowly, deliberately, like a predator cornering prey. His earlier charm had vanished completely. Now she saw the real man, the monster who had killed 2 wives and was about to kill a third. "You couldn't just play along, could you?" Maverick said, his voice low and dangerous. "I gave you everything. A beautiful dress, a grand wedding, a place in this town. All you had to do was be grateful, be obedient. You built this marriage on lies," Maggie said, her voice shaking but fierce. "These documents are fake. My stepfather never owed you anything. Emily was never in danger. You fabricated everything to trap me." Maverick laughed, cold and cruel. "Of course I did. Your stepfather is a drunk and a fool, but he's not in debt to me. I simply needed leverage." He stepped closer. "I saw you at that train station 3 weeks ago. Watch you step off that train looking so proud, so independent. I knew then that I wanted you. And what Cole Maverick wants, he takes." "Why?" Maggie demanded. "Why go through all this? You could have any woman, but they come willingly," Maverick said with disgust. "Where's the victory in that? You, though, you had fire, spirit. Breaking you would be so much more satisfying." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, painfully tight. "And I will break you, Margaret, just like I broke the others." Maggie's other hand closed around something on the desk behind her. A letter opener, heavy and sharp. "You killed them," she whispered. "Caroline and Anna. You murdered your wives." Caroline was weak, Maverick said dismissively. "Cried all the time, begged to leave. The riding accident was a mercy, really." His grip tightened until Maggie gasped in pain. "Anna was smarter. She almost made it out of town. But almost isn't good enough." Rage flooded through Maggie's terror. Those poor women. Trapped, abused, murdered by this monster. And he thought she would be next. She brought the letter opener up hard and fast, slashing across his arm. Maverick roared in pain and stumbled back. Blood soaked through his expensive white shirt. His face twisted with fury. "You'll pay for that." He lunged at her. Maggie ran for the door, but he caught her, his hand tangling in her hair. She screamed as loud as she could. "Help! Someone help me!" "No one's coming," Maverick snarled, dragging her back. "They're all too afraid." But he was wrong. The office door exploded inward. Sheriff Cassidy burst through first, gun drawn. Behind him came Mrs. Pritchard, Mr. Chun, and a dozen other townspeople. They filled the doorway, and for the first time, Maggie saw them united. Not afraid, angry. "Step away from her, Maverick," Sheriff Cassidy ordered, cocking his pistol. Right now, Maverick's face went white with shock, then purple with rage. "You dare? You all work for me. This town belongs to me." "Not anymore," Mrs. Pritchard said, her voice trembling but strong. "We're done being afraid of you." Mr. Chun stepped forward. "We heard everything, Maverick. Your confession about the forged documents. About murdering your wives. These people are witnesses." Maverick looked around at the assembled townspeople and saw the truth in their faces. They had finally found their courage. "This is treason," he spat. "I'll destroy every one of you. I'll burn this whole town to the ground." "No, you won't," Sheriff Cassidy said. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and suspicion of murder. Federal marshals are already on their way from Denver. Turns out, Anna's family never believed she ran away. They've been investigating you for 2 years." Maverick's hand moved toward his vest pocket. "I'm not going to hang," he hissed, pulling a small derringer. Everything happened at once. Maverick aimed at Maggie. Sheriff Cassidy fired. The bullet hit Maverick in the shoulder, spinning him around. The derringer clattered to the floor. Maverick collapsed against the wall, bleeding and beaten. "It's over," Cassidy said, moving to cuff him. "Finally over." Maggie's legs gave out. Mrs. Pritchard caught her before she fell, holding her close. "You're safe now, child. You're safe." The next hours passed in a blur. Dr. Wilson came to treat Maverick's wounds before he was locked in a cell. The townspeople gathered at the sheriff's office, giving statements. Maggie sat wrapped in a blanket, still wearing her wedding dress, the forged documents on the desk in front of her. Sheriff Cassidy explained what had happened. "Mrs. Pritchard came to me 3 days ago," he said. "She told me about Caroline's death, her suspicions about Anna's disappearance. We started gathering evidence quietly. When we heard you'd been forced into this marriage, we knew we had to act. But we needed proof, Mrs. Pritchard added. Real evidence that would stand up in court. When you went into that office tonight, we followed. We heard everything he said through the door. Mr. Chin nodded. His confession about the forged documents, about the murders. 12 of us heard all. That's enough to convict him. Maggie looked around at these people who had saved her life. Thank you, she whispered. All of you. Thank you. The federal marshals arrived the next morning, grim-faced men with badges and authority. They took Maverick away in chains. He didn't look so powerful anymore. Just a cruel man facing justice at last. The marshals also brought news. They had found Anna's body buried on Maverick's ranch. Caroline's death was being reopened as a murder investigation. Cole Maverick would stand trial for everything. A judge arrived 2 days later to sort out the legal mess. After reviewing the forged documents and hearing testimony from the witnesses, he made his ruling. The marriage contract between Cole Maverick and Margaret Fletcher is hereby declared null and void, obtained through fraud and coercion. Miss Fletcher, you are a free woman. Maggie nearly collapsed with relief. Free. She was actually free. The town rallied around her in the weeks that followed. The school board insisted she stay on as teacher. Mrs. Pritchard gave her a permanent room at the boarding house, refusing payment. Mr. Chun donated books and supplies for her classroom. The children, when school finally started, were eager and bright and full of hope. Slowly, Maggie began to heal. The nightmares faded. The fear loosened its grip. She threw herself into teaching, finding joy in watching young minds grow and learn. 3 months later, word came from Denver. Cole Maverick had been found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to hang. Justice, finally, for Caroline and Anna and all the people he had hurt. On the day of his execution, Maggie didn't celebrate. She simply went to the small cemetery outside town where Caroline and Anna were now properly buried with real headstones. She laid flowers on their graves. You're free too now, she whispered. All of us are free. That evening, as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Maggie stood outside her schoolhouse. The building that had brought her to Pine Ridge, to that terrible night, to the Waltz that nearly destroyed her. But she had survived. More than survived. She had fought back and won. Sheriff Cassidy walked up, hat in hand. Miss Fletcher, wanted to check on you. I'm fine, Sheriff, Maggie said, and meant it. Better than fine, actually. He smiled, a rare warm expression on his weathered face. You're strong, Miss Fletcher. Stronger than Maverick ever understood. This town's lucky to have you. After you left, Maggie went back inside the schoolhouse. On her desk sat the music box from Maverick's office. The townspeople had given it to her, thinking she might want to destroy it. But Maggie had a different idea. She wound it up, and the waltz began to play. That haunting melody that had been the soundtrack to her nightmare. But as it played now, in her schoolhouse, surrounded by children's drawings and spelling lessons and hope, it was just music, beautiful and sad and powerless. She had taken the symbol of her captivity and made it her own. The dance that was supposed to trap her had instead revealed Maverick's evil and led to his downfall. The waltz hadn't destroyed her. It had freed her. Maggie closed the music box and set on the shelf. Tomorrow, she would teach the children about the Bill of Rights, about freedom and justice and standing up to tyrants. She would teach them that one person's courage could inspire a whole town to be brave. And maybe, someday far in the future, when the memories didn't hurt quite so much, she would dance again. But on her own terms, with someone kind, someone who saw her as an equal, not property. But for now, she was content with this. Her little schoolhouse, her students, her freedom, her life, finally and completely her own. They say in the territories of 1882, a cowboy's word was law. But Maggie Fletcher had learned something more important. Sometimes the law itself is wrong. And when it is ordinary people, finding extraordinary courage can change everything. She thought it was just a game. A cruel wager made by a monster in a black Stetson. But it became something more. A test of will, a fight for survival, a story of justice. And in the end, Maggie Fletcher didn't just survive the waltz. She won.